Thanks, Stephanie. Delighted to join Donna and you on this panel. Thanks, J.P., for hosting, and hats off to Lyle Feisel for coming up with this idea and organizing it. And I've known Lyle for over 40 years, and it's unfortunate to be here. I'm going to start at the beginning of engineering education in the U.S. Raise your hand if you can name the first degree granting engineering school in the U.S. So if you said the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, that's correct. Founded by Thomas Jefferson, 1802, granted degrees about 15 years later. First civilian engineering education, engineering degrees in the U.S. Contested a little bit. Many, Ellen and Nathan know. Rensselaer is often attributed, 1824, but Norwich in Vermont also was active early on. Of course, outside the U.S., in Europe, goes back quite a bit farther, the École des Mines in France, for example. Other pivotal events in the 1800s in engineering education in the U.S., one was the Justin Morrill Act, 1862, signed by Lincoln, created the land grant colleges. Many of us, how many of you are from a land grant? Wow. If I asked how many of you are educated at a land grant, it would go up even higher, I think. Another significant development was the second land grant, 1890, which added some additional resources and created the historically black colleges as land grants. So we have a pretty long history. Since 1918, we have been systematically studying engineering education. I'd like to note, though, that there is precious little ink expended on how to teach in these reports. There are some interesting insights, though. These are the principal points from the Mann report. Take a look at them. Yeah, how many of them still are issues today? Right, most of them. I would argue that we have moved the needle on number 2. Not by controlling admission more, but through educational research and theory, things like mastery, things like criterion reference assessment, Ben Bloom's idea, things like improved pedagogy. So we still have a lot of work to do. Jeff Freud, Bill Wonkat, and I, responding to Leah Jameson, I did a piece on 5 major shifts in 100 years of engineering education for the IEEE Centennial issue. And we noted that there wasn't a lot of change until after World War II. The first shift happened after World War II. The turbulent 60s created a lot of other change with civil rights, the space program, and I'll say a little bit more about the emergence of ERM in a minute. We are arguing that, for the most part, 1 and 2 are done. We've done those. 3 and 4 are in progress. And it's 4 that I will mostly focus on. The shift to applying educational, learning, and social behavioral sciences research. The turbulent 60s, rough times for ERM division of ASEE. But in 1968, ERM created a journal. I became a member of ASEE in 1973, so that's the first issue I have. This journal, I still have it. This journal that lasted about 10 years, and it's really interesting reading. In 1980, ERM developed the Distinguished Lecture Series, in which we brought experts from outside engineering to help us learn about learning theories, motivation theories, development theories, etc. I've just included the first 11 years. I would have included the first 10, only except it took us 10 years before we invited a woman, Pat Cross, who's an extraordinary scholar and pilot. I want to give a shout out to Otis Lancaster. Otis developed and hosted what was called the Summer Institute on Effective Teaching for young engineering teachers in the 60s. This was quite influential. At least two of the engineering education pioneers folks, Dave Volkmer and Larry Grayson, if you don't know this website, Cindy Atman, whoever Cindy is, and her team created interviews with pioneers, great stories, but these two were especially influenced by Otis's work. Otis was president of ASEE 40 years ago. And it was when I was beginning to become active. And each month, his president's column started with, "Do we believe in?" This is an example. Do we believe in education research, or engineering education? Engineering research, sorry. And the case always was, "You had better believe it." That was the message for each one of these. The last one in the series was called, "Do we believe in ASW?" I think it's relevant reading for today. And in the spirit of Otis, I would ask, do we believe in theory, especially learning theory? Do we believe in evidence, especially research-based or evidence-based instructional practices? And again, in the spirit of Otis, you better believe in it. Otis published a book called Effective Teaching and Learning, 1974. Wish I'd read it for my first course. This is just a sampling of the chapters. I'll draw your attention to chapter 16, where he said, let's be engineers in our educational work. Let's engineer education. And his research for learning achievement, he said the battle cry of this book is, become better learning leaders. My first teaching experience wasn't based on great practice. It was based on my experience. In my first teaching experience, I thought my job was to impart knowledge. I thought the student's job was to get her to absorb it. I lectured, I signed homeworks, I gave exams, and it failed miserably. I was devastated. A few others, I would guess, have had experiences in your first. Michael Louis nodding vigorously. It's not an uncommon experience. Amazingly, though, in retrospect, instead of blaming the students, instead of saying, which was the common comment of the day, send me better students, I'll do a better job. By the way, I think that phrase should be banned, or at least scorned. I thought there has to be a better way to do this than what I'm doing. And proximity is a wonderful thing. I started taking courses in the College of Education, and I found somebody actually knew something about learning, about development, about motivation. But it was this course that changed my life. This is a course in social psychology of learning. First day, instructor randomly assigned us to formal teams. Emphasized interdependence and accountability. And I thought, wow, this is the way I worked as an engineer on the job. This is the way I run research programs. Why wouldn't we do this in an undergraduate program? Started using it in my classes. Started working with David and Roger Johnson doing systematic research. And in '81, conference that was hosted at Lyle's institution, I introduced the idea to engineering educators. My first JEE article that year, the same idea. And the standard of evidence in '81, for those of you who don't know, it was, this is what I did in my class and the students liked it. This used a very different standard of evidence. There's a theoretical framework, it's called social independence theory. It's randomized design control group studies, which are very hard to do, but I didn't know that any better back in the 70s, so I did them anyway. So it was pretty interesting. About the same time, Sandy Aston at UCLA was developing his student development theory. He uses an input environment outcomes model. It's correlational research. And he was looking for what environmental factors are most predictive of positive change in students' academic development, personal development, satisfaction. He found two that were very highly correlated. Frequency and quality of student-student interaction, frequency and quality of student-faculty interaction. They're more highly correlated than everything else. I found that reassuring. It's very congruent with what I was doing. Very different research methodology. Aston also started the Higher Ed Research Institute, and in 1989 published their first faculty survey. I draw your attention to faculty's report of their use of cooperative learning in all or most courses. It's about 60%. And I thought, whoa, we're making progress. In 2011, they reported STEM faculty separately from everybody else. Take a quick look. What do you notice? Two big patterns. Yeah, women embrace research-based instructional practices. Thank you. We need more. Men, lowest frequency of cooperative learning, highest frequency of grading on the curve, which makes it impossible to get students to work together, highest frequency of extensive lecturing. Men, we've got a problem. It's us. Enormous amount of evidence, but we know the evidence is not sufficient. Because a very recent study, this was published in Science 2 months ago, observational study of over 2,000 STEM classrooms, look at the most frequent common faculty behaviors. Lecturing. The second one, what Jim Duderstadt calls distal pedagogy, teaching with your back to the students, still very common. What are the students doing? Watching, listening. Got to do better. So the 2000s brought, the floodgates opened on reports. There were lots and lots of reports. I draw your attention to just a couple of them. I don't know, is Sherry Shepard in the room? Sherry led this educating engineers designing for the future of the field. It's part of the Carnegie study of the professions. It uses Bill Sullivan's framework, the three apprenticeships: apprenticeship of the head, the hand, the heart, intellectual skill, habits, mind, modes of thinking. Guess what? Engineering, all head, a little bit of hand, no heart. It's an issue for me. Ruth Graham did a very recent report, which I will return to in a few minutes. Another development in the mid-2000s is we joined the club in discipline-based education PhD programs. The medics were first back in the 60s. Physics, chemistry had been around for quite a long time. In 2004, 5, 6, 4 schools created engineering education PhD programs: Purdue, Virginia Tech, Clemson, Utah State. Now, according to Ken Yashihara and Adam Carberry, who manage the engineering education community resource, there are 68 graduate programs. Woohoo! In 2011, a real highlight of my career, Renata Engel, who is the president of ASW, it was the 100th anniversary of the Journal of Engineering Education, asked me to do the plenary, the big plenary, 2,000 people. And I'm a shy Midwestern guy, so I said, now let's bring others who actually are out there doing this stuff. So I worked with Jacqueline. We brought these 6 folks who came and talked about their use of research-based instructional practices. This was videotaped, but the videotape got lost. So maybe Nathan can find it. I know it's a free time. Notice 3 men and 3 women, 2 international folks. Jack and I are really proud of this work that we did. Jack Lohman and Leah Jameson also did 2 reports, which I recommend to you. They have some great ideas for achieving innovation with impact. Coming back to Ruth Graham's report on the future, she's identified these 3 trends. Tilt of the axis, more South America, Asia. Move towards socially relevant and outward-facing engineering curriculum. And the emergence of a new generation of leaders that deliver integrated, student-centered curricula at scale. I agree. My own personal ideas on this, I think we got to focus on big ideas. And I think these 3 big ideas would help us make a lot of progress. 1, focus on what we know about how people learn. Learning requires deliberate, distributed practice. It's from the learning science folks. It has to be intentional. We have a very limited short-term memory. As faculty, we need to manage cognitive load. Distributed, we've known for a long time, that distributed practice leads to more and deeper learning than mass practice. Also varying modes, auditory, kinesthetic, visual, etc. is another way of distributing. And practice, the current state of the art for practice is interactive or cooperative learning. Not easy to do, but it makes a difference. I would argue, along with my colleague Ruth Strebler, that we need to re-embrace Otis Lancaster's idea and use an engineering approach in engineering education. This is what we call the streamlined course design process. It models or parallels the engineering design process. We need to move to pedagogies of engagement. There's roles for lectures like this, but you have to know quite a lot to benefit from a lecture like this. Finally, I would argue we need to follow the evidence. This is Susan Singer, who chaired the Discipline-Based Education Research Report that I served on, representing engineering. And she and I argued that discipline-based education research dispels myths about learning and yields results if only educators would use it. So I think we really need to move on from faith-based claims. You know, I know this works, trust me, my students are learning, to evidence-based claims. In the words of W. Edward Deming, in God we trust, everybody else must bring data. Thank you. This is put up, there's a new website link on ASEE called Engineering Education Research and Innovation. It'll be there. And next, we shall hear from Donna Riley, who will talk about whom to teach. Okay.